Okay, so welcome back everybody. In the previous session, we created a pull request for a postcard. While we've been working and having a short break, the build has finished for the new pull request. All the changes that Nigel requested as a maintainer have been completed. And so now we're seeing the green merge pull request button. Now only maintainers can do this, and normally I wouldn't do my own. Well, sometimes I do, but you know, often we do each other's. But basically, this final stage is what the maintainers do to bring the changes into Egeria. So now, if we look at the code, whether it's immediate or whether you have to do it a bit slowly. So this is the resources. This is the tutorials where we are. This is where the postcards are. And now you can see my change is visible in the public Egeria GitHub. So that's the final stage to bring changes in that the maintainers are responsible for. Right, so let's go back to the agenda and see where we are. Where has it gone? There. And here. Now the thing, because we were doing documentation changes, I skipped over the testing. And one of the most important parts of the testing that goes on is the unit tests that are located inside our build. And so for particular modules, let's pick one. So the modules are all in implementation. Access services, asset consumer. What you see when we go, so at this point, where it says SRC, that's where the source is located, and there's two versions. There's the main version, which is, this is actually the code that belongs to this module. And then there's a sort of shadow version of the code, and this is where the test cases sit. And there are different types, but generally you have a test code, a test file for each Java file that exists. And in there, you create methods that have at test on the front of them, and they run as a unit test. And from IntelliJ, you can actually run the test, and it will execute as it's going. So it's doing a little build, and now it's just running the unit test. So not quite yet, it's still building. And there we are, and it's telling me that the tests run. Only when the tests run will the build succeed. So as you're building unit tests, you need to make sure that they run as we're going along. So you can't create tests of things you haven't built yet, which is one of the disadvantages of having the tests built into the runtime. It means that you have to develop the code and the tests. At least the tests need to lag the code. So that's one thing. This is using JUnit. We have some modules that have a much more sophisticated set of testing using something called Mockito. And so their tests, you see here, it's for modules that have dependencies on other modules. And so Mockito will mock out the modules that the module you're testing is dependent on, and then you can determine what responses it gets, so you can test it through different code paths. So it's a little bit more effort. It's typically used on our server side to test things that need that bigger framework. So that's Mockito, and then the next thing we have is called functional verification testing, and they are located in our test directory. So under the test module, this is here, this is where I am. There are two modules. One of them is unit test, and this has just got some utilities for testing different types of of classes in the unit test. So that's just common utilities. The one that's interesting is the FVT, the functional verification test. The open types test is the one that takes a long time in the build. This is the one that generates a huge amount of code based off of all the types that have been defined, and then generates code to test that they're operating correctly. And that's actually flushed out a lot of interesting problems in the repository services when it was first written. But we run that whenever you do a Maven clean install as well. The other FVTs are for testing. If you imagine we're testing individual classes in unit test. As we get to FVT, we're looking at testing each method, and it may be involving a server. So these FVTs all expect a single server, and they are just written as the author wants, and they pretty much have a main, and they go through. Oh, this one's empty, so that's not very good. Let's go through the subject area, which I know has got lots in it. And here you've got different tests that just go through and pound the clients to make sure that that they support error checking and that sort of thing in that environment. So FVT is good. As you can see, each level of testing we're going to getting a little bit more sophisticated. Then we've got the notebooks that you saw yesterday, and that allows us to run through we've got quite a complex setup, and then there's a whole series of things that you can run through just to verify that the broader ecosystem is working. And then perhaps the most sophisticated of our testing is what we call the conformance suite. It doesn't test everything. In fact, let's look at it up on here. Because it's easier to see. So that works. Yes. It's designed for vendors to validate that their connectors into Egeria work correctly. And what they're after when they run this particular test is this badge. And this badge can be displayed with the product to say that it can connect to the Egeria environment and do no harm, basically. So it passes all our tests. And the conformance suite itself is, see if I can go down onto the, let's see. Let's do this. Yeah. So the conformance suite itself joins a cohort. So you've got a system you're testing, and the conformance suite is a server in its own right, and it joins the same cohort as the technology we're testing. And then it pounds it. It literally tries all the requests with lots of different types. And then it's also listening on the, I think another picture here. Let's have a look. No, there isn't. No, there isn't. It is also listening on the event port, on the event. So it's making calls to the server that we're testing, and it's it's reading the events and putting events onto the into the cohort topic. And this means that we can push it through lots of different error handling and situations that we hope really don't happen in a real cohort. But we want to validate that any server that's involved in a cohort can handle situations where there's been a conflict, where a particular server is not being managed correctly, and that type of thing. So that's what the conformance suite does. Nigel mentioned earlier on that if you're running the conformance suite then you need to make sure that there's a lot more storage, because this, as I say, this thing is very vigorous when it comes to testing the server. And you can run this manually, that there are REST APIs and things, but we also have a notebook. See if I can find Jupyter. So we've got lots of things open. My Jupyter is hiding. There's a Jupyter. Oh, I'm not sure. I haven't got it running. I won't be able to show it, but there is under the directory. There's a conformance suite that you can actually run Notebook, and that will run the conformance suite for you, do all the setup and stuff. So it's something that we also run every release to make sure that everything we ship, our connectors for the repositories are compliant. And so that is the conformance suite test. So that's our third level of testing that we have in the environment. Is there anything any of the other maintainers want to talk about testing?
Hi. I guess the only thing to add is what we touched on earlier around Docker and Kubernetes. We try to make sure that things work in those environments as well as when they run locally. And the usual of be careful of any platform-specific issues. We don't currently build on Windows, but I know we have some contributors and users that are working with Windows. So we do try and test that occasionally, but we don't have automated testing on Windows yet.
I haven't really got much to add. I think it's really good practice to always try to add some automated testing if you're doing anything that's substantial, however you do it.
And one thing to consider here as well is if you've got an area to test, how long does the test take? Because we have this build verification step, there's a balancing act we have between a completely thorough test and developer throughput. So we don't want to extend the tests to like half a day because it will just slow us down too much. But we have the option of running tests maybe after the code's been merged, or running it daily or in some deferred batch way. So that's always a discussion that can be had with the maintainers around when the best time to run some of these tests is, especially if they're very extensive, and we'd love extensive tests. I guess it's all very quiet. Presumably everyone's still there. David?
I'm here.
Oh, hi, Susan.
Are we pausing or waiting for a discussion to emerge?
I think we're just waiting for Mandy to continue. We're just jumping in, talking about any extra testing pieces that we may have.
Okay. Maybe she doesn't know she's on mute.
I've just gone for a coffee break.
I was talking to you. So I've got a question here. Should we be building now? So are you working, at what point are you in the flow? So I'm not sure how to answer that question.
Oh yeah, no, I just I saw that somebody was running a Maven clean install on the code base, and I was just wondering if now was the time to do that, or.
So you can do it sort of as you're completing a change, particularly if it's a code change. When the pull request is being processed, that's running a Maven clean install. So I think my pull request has disappeared now. Oh, we've got another one here. So we've got a number of pull requests coming in. This is excellent. We've got one that's having trouble. Let's have a look and see what's wrong here. We've got changes requested. Oh, so what's your first name? Sorry, Jerome. Jerome, when you did the commit, you didn't do -s to add the signature. And so what's happening here is that the DCO is failing. So it's saying basically that your one of your commits, or maybe all of them, doesn't have a -s on it. Nigel, do you know how to fix that?
What's the best? Yeah.
So the next question I've got here, yeah. Sorry, go on.
I was going to say yes. You would have to go and edit the commit, basically. I always have to look it up myself. try not to forget it. I'll post something in the chat.
Yeah.
The other way to,
Can you do it on the web-based UI, or is it all command line?
On your clone and then push it up. So yes,
yeah, I think one way I've done it in the past is to do branch or the remote branch and then back off the commit locally. That's one way to do it without editing. Then you can read it.
So Billy's put git commit -s -- amend.
Yeah.
It's easier just to amend the previous commit.
How does it know? Does that always pick up the last commit you did?
Yes.
Okay,
It does.
thanks.
Yeah, if you go back in history, it gets a little bit more complicated. But I mean, if you do get into trouble, do come onto the Slack or post it in the PR, and we can give you some tips on fixing it.
Okay, and so the next question we've got is, do any of the developers pair program? I know the IBM team, we don't. I'm not aware of whether the ING teams do. So at the moment, I'm not aware that that happens at all, unless we're trying to solve a problem, in which case we do tend to work together to actually get a problem solved. Or if we've got something, so for example, David and Graham have been working on the new UI, and they've been working together to bring it together. So we tend to work in teams when we need to, but most of the time we're working individually. And then the next question is, do you want to add anything to that before I go charging on to the next question?
I think there's times where it works really well. I haven't done it on this project, but I have done it on previous projects. So I think it's definitely, it's not, if you want to pair program, I don't think there's anything we're saying that will stop you. I guess the only interesting thing is how only one person can be attributed to the commit. So you might need to think about how you share visibility of what you do if there's two of you actually doing it.
That's a good point, David. Okay, the next one is test-driven development used? And again, this is an individual perspective, an individual choice. I mean, David, you're a very great fan of testing, aren't you? And building tests as you go. Both the FET suite you have and the testing. But as I say, we don't tend to dictate how people develop stuff. Really, what we focus on is the content in the contribution when it comes. So how is it documented? How does it appear? How is it used? And one of the things we do like is automated tests, but we don't mandate it. Again, any other comments or comments on that? And then David is saying something you're.
The only thing I was going to say, the only thing I'd add is bear in mind, anyone that's interested in the project is very welcome to comment on pull requests as they come in. So although we talk about the maintainers having that approval for the pull request, anyone can add comments and feedback if they're interested in a particular area or concerned about changes.
I think it's sensible to do some sort of automated testing, whichever form it is. And if there's a particular area that's owned by a maintainer, you should probably follow the style that's in that area. So some areas are going to be heavily tested by the compliance testing, the conformance testing, and other areas might have FETs and others might have JUnits. So the area you find yourself in, if you're working in an existing area, will probably have a style of testing. But I think if it's something that you feel strongly about, I think it's more important that we work together rather than any particular person being dictatorial about it within the community. So if you feel we're missing something or could be adding testing, then I think it's I think we should just have an open conversation about it for the particular case that you're concerned about.
We also have some static analysis of the code. We use Sonar Cloud, and that will automatically scan for typical code errors. That's a static analysis, though, not dynamic code analysis. So we try and pay attention to those and fix up code, and the maintainers have access to that repo. We're always looking at how we can make that a little bit more accessible to people. We've still got a little way to go. We do the same thing with security. Mandy talked earlier about managing the dependencies. We also evaluate those in automated tools that show us CVEs and things of that nature that may impact our code.
And what you realise with these projects is that there's as much care taken to actually make this a robust and secure platform, as you would expect from a product. Software today is under attack, and so this is why we have to be so diligent about security and issues in the code itself. I've got another question here. So how many open source projects do people usually work on? The size of some warrants a lot, dedication, passion for the particular space, and how much time is reasonable for a part-time contributor? So I will leave that one open. I always have my own opinion, but I thought I'd pass it on, give it a chance for other people to talk. I think when it comes to Egeria, most of us are full-time on Egeria. So the team that you're talking to at the moment is IBM's Egeria upstream team. So we're 100% on Egeria, and our contributions to other projects are around defects that we find as part of the work on this project. And we may talk to other projects that we're doing an integration with. So it's our full-time job. I think when it comes to a part-time contributor, we have other people who contribute in the evenings or they come to the calls. It's absolutely up to you, to be honest. It's what you're comfortable with, what makes sense for you. If you want to be a maintainer, that is something that is you don't have to be full-time, but you do have to be looking most days at the pull requests and providing reviews and support to people. So that's a much bigger time commitment. But to be a contributor, it's really as much as you can do. It's totally voluntary.
I agree. I don't think there should be a minimum for the contributor, but if you do one thing to get the tick in the box and then never do anything else, I guess that would be against the spirit of things. If you're interested in being a contributor, I assume that there would be some time that you'd make in a month that you'd be doing that.
Yeah, we normally look at the history of contributions for the contributor badge.
I think, I think it is very variable, though. I'm thinking, I'm full time on Egeria, but for example, we hit problems in Java code base, and so raised an issue on the OpenJ9 team, which is one of the JVMs for Java, and that was just one issue. Okay, maybe there were two, so it was very little time I spent on that, but it was a number of hours, number of days, but it was valuable to them, and they found a defect and they fixed it, and it improved the code. So I think even, just those one-off defects can actually be valuable to a team. So I think anything moves it forward.
Yeah, I think at one point they were using Egeria as a test case, weren't they?
Oh, actually, it went on. It did actually go on. I felt sorry for them for a couple of months because it was deep into the JVM and the optimization and code inlining and stuff, and they finally got to it, but it took them ages, and it was our code that broke them. It was actually our build process, but still. Yeah,
we do push because of the size of the project. We do push things to a limit, and we sort of push limits on things. But yeah, that was a good one.